I have a short and sharp episode for you today with a really, really clear message. Today, I'm going to tell you why you should never ever repeat your stories of hurt, your stories of trauma, your stories of anger without tapping at the same time. Let's listen to this episode to find out why. Now, if you don't know how to use EFT, if it is something that you would like to explore more of, then I invite you to check out my Tapping Inner Circle. It is a membership for self-led women who would like to elevate their emotional state, come off autopilot, and live more intentionally with the modality of EFT tapping. It is an online experience that you can actually jump into straight away, and it's also really affordable as well. And as we are going to be talking about trauma today, we're going to be talking about stories that, don't make you feel so good. I just really want to remind you as well that if you do have big things that you need to work through, you may like to book a discovery call with me. We can chat about my 1 month intensive. It is where we spend 4 weeks together helping you to neutralize and desensitize any trauma that is actively wreaking havoc in your mind, in your body, and impacting your life, and help you come out of survival mode so you can start to live more intentionally again, so you can start to feel good again, reconnect with yourself again. Now, the discovery call is a 20-minute phone call. It is free to have that chat, but I do want to chat to you if you're ready. If you're ready to do the work, then that call is for you. Let's get into this episode, and I'm going to tell you exactly why you should never retell your stories without tapping.
You're listening to Alive and Thriving with Jessica Reed, the podcast that's all about empowering you to achieve optimal wellness and success through self-care, holistic practices, and raw conversations. Jessica and her expert guests are here to share powerful insights and strategies to help you overcome stress and anxiety, take charge of your life, and thrive in life and in business. Grab a cuppa and let's dive in.
So I know we are all guilty of this. I'm so guilty of this. And to be honest, when I reflect back on my life, you guys know I love being honest with you. I hope that my realness and my stories can really help you feel seen and heard and understand that we're all human. When I reflect back on times of my life that were challenging, particularly a period from 2009 to 2018-ish, 2020 to 2020, where my stories were my identity. So in 2009, I had a major car accident. You can go back and listen to the episode where I tell you all about that. And then for years after that, for years and years and years, I had to continually retell my story. Now that trauma became ingrained in me, and I'm going to explain in a moment why retelling the story so frequently really probably did me more harm than good. That story became a part of my identity, massive part of my identity. And I would tell anybody and everybody who would listen that I had this accident, that I had this experience. I would tell them all the details. And then come, more trauma. In 2018, the knee dislocation, pulmonary embolism, blood clot, surgery, all these things. This also became my story, and it also had to be retold, not only to doctors and other people, medical people, but I found myself, and when I reflect back on it, I found myself talking about it all the time. Now, your brain makes connections. Your brain is lazy. It likes shortcuts. It does not like to come up with new material every single time it learns something new, right? Or it loves to learn, but it doesn't like to come up with new material. So every time I would tell my story, and I want you to think about the stories that you're telling. Are you continually telling everyone about the fight you had with your partner, about the person at work who drove you insane, about the client who upset you? Do you come home and you tell your story of sadness, of pain, of trauma over and over and over again? Do you repeat it over and over and over again in your mind? Do you jump on people's podcasts and Instagram lives and share your story? Because it is filled with so much hope and it's so beautiful and it's so much a part of how you got to where you are. But I have the hiccups. Do you realize every time you tell this story, every time, you are strengthening the neural pathway in your brain of this story? Every time you retell the story, you strengthen it. Now, your brain does not know the difference between something perceived and something real. And so I'll go back to my example, and I encourage you to think about you and what stories you are reinforcing. Every time I retold that story, my body would respond in some state of stress, as if it was happening now, because the body can only respond to the brain and what you're thinking and what's going on. And the brain is thinking, that something's happening in the here and now. And so every time I would tell my story, it just strengthened that trauma. It kept making me relive that trauma, and it kept strengthening that pathway. So whether you're telling your story out loud or whether you are telling your story in your head by being stuck in the thought over and over and over again, every time you're stuck in these thoughts, you are strengthening that pathway every single time. So here is why you should tap while you're telling a story. Because when we are tapping, and you can tap on any point. Okay, so if you're chatting with a friend, you're out to coffee and you feel like you really want to offload something onto them, I encourage you just to tap on maybe one of your finger points, tap on the side of your hand. You can do it really quite discreetly. If you're on the phone to your mom and you're telling her about your awful day or something that happened, tap on all the points, tap on any point that you're drawn to. If you're in my tapping in a circle, you can go into the EFT on demand area and you can look up the emotion that you're feeling and find the meridian, the tapping point, the actual point that supports that emotion. And you can use it as emotional first aid. But tap while you are telling the story. And if you are a client of mine, then you will know every time you start telling me a story, I say, hang on, just tap while you're telling me. And that is because I do not want you to continue to re-strengthen that neural pathway. So every time you then interrupt that pathway, and then you have an opportunity to reframe that thought or reprogram that thought, which we also do in sessions with EFT, you are one step closer to that pathway no longer having anything to connect to. So basically, when we're tapping, we're sending a calming signal up to our brain, up to our fight or flight response that says that this thing that we're tapping about, that we're thinking about, that we're feeling, that we're actually safe while we're thinking about it and we're feeling it. That is not the message that this story had previously had. And so then, if we continue to tap as we tell this story, every time this story tries to fire off, we are breaking that connection of what it wires to. You may have heard the term, what fires together wires together. And that means that every time you fire off a pathway in your brain with a repeated thought, with a habit, with anything that the brain has made these shortcuts to, because again, it's lazy and it likes these shortcuts so it doesn't have to go and relearn everything every minute of the day. It's got enough information to process. But every time you fire off that again, and then it connects to those feelings, it connects to all the things that you've associated with it previously, it's firing and wiring together. And so if we can tap while we're telling a story, then it's firing. But there's a different signal to wire it to because you've interrupted it. You've interrupted the pattern. Now, there are other ways to interrupt patterns. You can click your next to your ear 3 times and say stop and interrupt the pattern. And then replace it. Really important. Replace it straight away with a new thought. There are plenty of ways, plenty of pattern disruptors to interrupt negative patterns. But how easy is it to do it with tapping? Because you can pick any point. It doesn't have to be one of the clinical points. It can be one of the finger points, the gamut point. You can pick any point and you can tap while you're talking. And you can teach your brain that when it fires off that pathway, that there is nothing for it to attach to. And eventually that pathway will die off. Eventually, there'll be a new pathway of what you have replaced it with. So I highly encourage you to, when you are telling your stories, when you are having, for lack of better words, when you're having a whinge, when you're venting, when you're focusing on something that does not make you feel good, don't allow yourself to continue to reinforce it. This is not toxic positivity. I'm not saying ignore the bad feelings and focus only on the good. But what I am saying is that when you are exploring and holding space for those bigger feelings, use a pattern interrupter such as EFT tapping so that you can reprogram the way that your hippocampus has actually filed that memory. Release the emotional attachment behind it so it can just become a story. And stories without emotion behind them, they don't get anywhere near as much attention in the brain. Nowhere near as much attention. So that is why every time from here on in, you are telling a story, I want you to be aware. I want you to think, do I want to reinforce this story? Even if it's been a story that you have told since you were a child. Do I want to reinforce this story? Does it make me feel good? Is it in my best interest? And if it is not serving you, then tap while you are telling it. And if it is something that is, really deep, if it's living in your body, if you're feeling it, if you know that it is impacting you, then I highly encourage you to reach out to a professional, if not me, then someone else, to help you release it once and for all, to help you reprogram it once and for all, bring safety to it once and for all. I hope you have the most beautiful week, and I would love for you to come over to Instagram. I'm at jessica.reid.ilc, and tell me that you listened to this episode, and tell me that you are now going to start tapping every time you tell your story. And if you come over and you tell me that on Instagram, then I will share with you some of the more discreet points that you can go and tap on. Have the most beautiful week.
Wow, what a journey it's been today. We are so grateful for each and every one of you who tuned in to Alive and Thriving. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help us keep growing, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform. It's a simple but powerful way to support a small business like ours to continue to make an impact.